Hello, friends. Welcome to the Peace and Power Ukraine podcast, a place to discuss all aspects of policy related to Ukraine. Ukraine sits at the crossroads of modern history where East meets West and freedom collides with totalitarianism. Today, I am recording here in Kyiv, Ukraine, and we're looking forward to discussing these unprecedented times with my good friend Cyril Hovorun. And I'm going to let him pronounce his exact title here in Ukraine.
Well, it's Archimandrite,
Yes.
which is an ecclesiastical title.
Very good. And he is one of the world's leading expert in these areas of ecclesiastical affairs and theology related to the Orthodox Church. He's been a previous education committee chair in the Russian Orthodox Church. He has great experience, great education background to have this conversation today. And as always, we seek to bring more light than heat as we dig a little deeper each episode with guests from across the public policy spectrum. So before we dig into headlines, help our audience understand just what is the nature of your work here in Ukraine, and then we will get into some of the controversy.
Well, I'm at home here in Ukraine. This is my home.
Yes.
That's what I call home. Otherwise, I just go wherever I spend most of my time outside, including LA. I spend a lot of time in LA, but still, Ukraine is my home. So I come here. I see my mom, see my brother, and reconnect with my friends. But also, I try to witness what is happening to Ukraine in order then to explain Ukraine outside. Just recently, for example, 2 days ago, there was a major strike on Ukraine, and well, over 30 people were killed, including children, but also some religious buildings were destroyed, like the mosque, a central mosque in Kyiv. So I went there, visited it, and I was shocked by what I saw. Also, I met the Mufti, the local Muslim leader, and expressed my condolences and solidarity with them as an Orthodox priest. And I think it is very important. That's what I find really fascinating about Ukraine, because everyone is so close to each other. We don't have, maybe I'm anticipating some of your questions, but let me tell this. In Ukraine, we really are blessed to have a great cooperation between the communities, which are usually in the West, do not cooperate very well with each other, like Jewish and Muslim communities, for example, because everyone is facing the same danger, everyone is facing the same threat, the same challenge, and we just feel, this brotherhood or sisterhood, of religious people, regardless of what religion, what tradition we belong to. So this is a very important thing that I feel in Ukraine. I live in Ukraine. I want to also to explain about Ukraine to the audiences outside.
That is powerful. And indeed, I'm with a group of American leaders, and yesterday we met with the chief rabbi here in Kyiv and had that kind of interfaith discussion. I know you're home here, but you travel the world. We met at a religious freedom summit in Nairobi, Kenya.
Correct.
And had a chance to share a meal together and get to know each other. And indeed, you also have a chair, the Huffington School at Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles, so you're there a lot. Then also in Stockholm, you've spent a lot of time.
Rome.
Yes, and in Rome. So you are everywhere, and you're also helping explain Ukraine and some of the challenges within the church here,
Right.
and the nature of the concerns that the Ukrainian people and the government have about their own Orthodox Church.
Right.
So help unpack that for our American audience in particular. What are those challenges? Because there is concerns that there's too much Russian influence in the Orthodox Church.
Yeah. Well, to explain these concerns to American people, I would say we can go back like to the World War II, when there were fears of, fifth column, like the Japanese people, for example, living in California, and how they were perceived by many, by the public in America. It doesn't mean that they were treated well at the time, but at least American public can understand some concerns that we have here. Or during the Cold War, everything Russian sounded suspicious in the United States for good or bad reasons. Well, in most cases for good reasons, I believe. Or after 9/11, the same applied to some radical Muslim communities in the U.S. and the American government had to take measures to not to expel, not to punish in wholesale everyone, but to make necessary distinctions, to discern, to differentiate between good kind of well-intending people, religious people, and not so much well-intending religious people. It's a major concern nowadays everywhere, and I think we need to understand the Ukrainian case in this wider context of the instrumentalization of religion by the Kremlin. And I observe the same concerns, the same sort of reservations that I've just mentioned, which apply to the American situation, but also in Europe, across Europe, especially the countries which are vulnerable and exposed to the potential Russian aggression, like the Baltic countries, and not just Baltic, but also everywhere across Europe is the same problem. The governments realized that the church, unfortunately, has been instrumentalized by the Russian government, because in the framework of the secularization, let me put it this way again, in the framework of the secularization, this secular age that we face somehow, for good or for bad. Again, I'm not going to judge it, but it's a perception when people believe that religion doesn't matter anymore. That's why religion was pushed to the kind of blind spot. That people who are experts, who are politicians, policymakers, they didn't pay attention to religion, and then religion bounces back. This happened, for example, with the Islamic Revolution in Iran, when the CIA, for example, didn't even notice that religion mattered at the time, and all of a sudden it just came out of the blue, and everyone was surprised everyone was surprised because people did not pay attention to this mental framework of secularization. They didn't believe that religion matters anymore.
Right. Let me dig in a little deeper on that. So if we unpack this at root, this is not just an ideological fight between East and West. There is this deep religious component because of the concept of Ruski Mir and the Russian Orthodox Church wrapped up in this Russian world ideology. This is the conflict that is now exposed within Ukraine, within the Orthodox Church. And this is the concern that the Russian ideology and not true faith alone is going to be pushing the church leaders and the church people to be listening to Moscow instead of loyal to Ukraine. Is that fair?
Absolutely so. You're absolutely right. And Ruski Mir, the Russian world ideology, is the new communist ideology for Russia. It's a substitute for the old Cold Era style of ideology that tried to expand everywhere, tried to change the minds of people also in the United States, for example. That's why there was this strong pushback from the US government, especially the Reagan era, and this sort of things that the American people know much better. Now we are dealing with a kind of communist ideology 2.0. It's an upgrade of the communist ideology now which sounds religious, but at the core is the same communist ideology. It's a combination of the elements of the Soviet ideas. For example, Patriarch Kirill recently, on the feast of Prince, the Great Duke of Kyiv, Volodymyr, in the Kremlin, it was 28th of July, he tried to justify Joseph Stalin, in his sermon. Imagine a senior hierarch of a church preaching Joseph Stalin from the pulpit. And that's what happened in Moscow. So we are dealing with a remade ideology of the Soviet kind, now with some religious elements attached to it, but those elements doesn't make it religion. It is still an ideology, but it looks like religion, and it operates like a religion. That's what I wanted to say. Because people didn't pay attention to religion was in the blind spot for many. And the Kremlin knew this. Kremlin realized that if you push your ideas, propel what you want, your agendas through religion, no one will notice it. this is like a shortcut. It's an easy track,
Right.
to do this. That's why they instrumentalize heavily religion. And now people in the Western societies started understanding, realizing this trick of the Kremlin, that Kremlin essentially tries to smuggle its agenda through religion and try to stop these smugglers.
And you know this, and you are familiar with this because, in fact, as I recall, you said when you were, growing up in the Orthodox Church as a young man, you were an assistant to Patriarch Kirill, and
true.
you had great familiarity because this from time in Russia learning. Is that fair?
Absolutely so. Yes. Well, I had an personal experience of this ideology growing from the I would say cradle of the church. This Russian world ideology is really a product of the church, and I would explain it in transactional terms, as I witnessed it being in Moscow, because I spent quite a lot of time in Moscow. I lived just like 1 kilometer from the Kremlin, next to the Kremlin, literally, and I saw it growing, and I saw how the church tried to sell it to the Kremlin. So basically, you may consider this ideology as a sort of product, an intellectual product, not necessarily like like MacBook Pros. It's more like artificial intelligence, right?
Okay.
You cannot touch it, but you can sell it, and that's exactly what the church tries to do. It has produced, Patrick Kirill personally has produced this ideological construction, where he included the elements of the Soviet times, of the Soviet ideology, the elements of the Russian monarchy before the revolution, the Romanovs monarchy, some medieval ideas like Moscow the Third Rome. It's a medieval component. He combined those elements together, attached them together, and then he tried to sell this ideology to the Kremlin, and the Kremlin bought it. So there was a transaction, and because before that, the Kremlin didn't have any ideology. Moreover, ideology is prohibited by the Russian constitution, but of course, no one cares about constitution. My point is that the Kremlin did not care about ideology, didn't even consider a new ideology as something important. And Kirill convinced Putin personally that ideology matters, that the Kremlin needs to have an ideology. The Kremlin believed it and bought this product, which was produced by the church. And of course, the church received real money, real resources by selling this product. Became rich. The Russian church has become the largest recipient of the grants, official grants from the Russian government, for example. And this is the payment for this ideology.
This is unbelievable. It's the church and state working hand in glove, just like in old times, but repackaged in this powerful new combination in Moscow. And the way this works practically is Patriarch Kirill will use holy water and bless missiles and bless tanks, and then he's promised soldiers places directly in heaven, even if they commit war crimes.
Exactly.
These are the
all those
tangible
justifications, all those theologies that he produces, they are to support Putin's war in Ukraine. And we in Ukraine, coming back to your earlier questions, we in Ukraine completely understand this trick. We are less naive, I would say, than the Western societies, than the Western governments, because we've lived with the Russians for centuries. We know them very well, and we know what they try to do, and we understand that they try to instrumentalize religion, and we try to react to that. Hence are the policies of the Ukrainian government. I would not call those policies as ideal. I personally would criticize some of them, but I understand the logic, the rationale of the attempts of Ukraine to neutralize this instrumentalization of religion for the political purposes. For us, it's a matter of life and death. It's not just a nice academic, conversation, who is right, who is wrong. For us, it's a matter of survival. That's why the measures can be drastic, and some of them are drastic. I would say that the government tries really to navigate this very difficult landscape, where on the one hand, religious freedom does matter. I believe religious freedom matters very much for the Ukrainian government, as long as I can observe them. On the other hand, this issue of national security, there is an ideal solution, an ideal formula which would combine things together. I see how the European governments struggle with the same issue. For example, the government of Estonia that faces the same kind of problem, and they still don't find a solution how to combine religious freedom on the one hand and national security on the other.
Right. It's a very difficult thing during time of war, but you can see when you're in a life and death struggle why Putin would try to undermine the Ukrainian people who are very faithful by manipulating the power of the Russian Orthodox Church and trying to influence things here. We have a very faithful people. As I understand it, almost 2/3 of Ukrainians would say they are Orthodox. So in particular, that's where he's taking the fight. In this area, because he wants to influence them and take them down. We have these practical stories that we hear of, you know, the wife of someone in the church who put a camera up at the top of the church, at a church bell, in order to monitor truth movements because she had access. So there are examples regularly that happen that challenge this. Correct.
Yes, and still we try not to generalize. We understand there are different people in the same church, and we don't judge by one, don't measure by the same size everyone. We understand there are people, the majority of those people who belong to this church that we are talking about, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, they are Ukrainian patriots, they are for the Ukraine cause, they want Ukraine to win. But we also understand there are people who wait for Putin to come, who want Putin to win this war, and they are in Ukraine, the Ukrainian citizens, and just one of those examples you've just mentioned. And this is, as I said, it's really a very painful issue. Ukraine is a super religious country. I think it's one of the most religious societies in Europe. Comparable maybe with Poland, and it's very diverse at the same time. I think it's more diverse than Poland, for example, because we have Orthodox who are the majority, and again the Orthodox now belong to two jurisdictions. We have Catholics, we have Greek Catholics, we have a sizable Jewish community, sizable Muslim communities, and we try to live in peace with one another. And moreover, in this situation,
evangelicals,
and evangelicals, of course, and of course, and the evangelicals, of course, and moreover, I would say, speaking about the evangelicals. I myself, for example, I started teaching in Ukraine in an evangelical seminary. They invited me to be a professor there, and I gladly accepted because it's really a token of ecumenism, of rapprochement, which is important in Ukraine. It adds to this diversity that we cherish, and we believe it's the fundamental thing that differentiates Ukraine from Russia or from many other countries. This diversity, this multiplicity of religion, and this friendship that we develop, that we have, and yes, and again, speaking about the evangelicals, take the east of Ukraine. East of Ukraine was heavily secularized in the Soviet era. It became like a religious desert, literally, Donbass. I'm talking about the Donbass area. And this is exactly the area which is invaded by the Russians nowadays. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, the evangelical groups really mushroomed there. And the number of the evangelical communities in that area exceeded the number of the Orthodox communities. Imagine. So it became really an evangelical area in Ukraine, probably the most evangelical area in Ukraine. And it was hit most heavily by the Russians. And I know you know also those cases where the Russians killed the pastors, they burned their books, they burned an excellent Christian university in Donetsk. I have many friends from that place. They put their soldiers as the kind of barracks for the soldiers. They turned that university. They burned the Bibles because they were printed by the Protestants. They say the Bibles were not Orthodox, even though there is no difference. It's the same Bible for Orthodox.
They see the Protestants and evangelicals as American agents.
Exactly.
So this in particular has led to great persecution in the occupied territories, not just of Protestants, but also Catholics and Orthodox.
And that's why I should say we as Orthodox, we are so much compassionate, we are so much in solidarity with our evangelical brothers and sisters, because they suffer so much from the same way as we suffer. This creates this momentum of solidarity between different Christian groups in Ukraine, because we face the same enemy.
Indeed, indeed. Well, as we close out, let me turn our attention to how this plays out in the United States. The Russian propaganda machine is constantly at work, and because this is such a difficult balance here in Ukraine of faith and orthodoxy and then religious freedom, they try to drive a wedge and create a narrative that Ukraine is anti-religious freedom, when nothing could be further from the truth. And this is a country that is so faithful, and much like the American South is how I explain it. So they try to drive this wedge and create narratives which then Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and others spread in the United States. So you're constantly speaking across the United States and helping explain this to American audiences. Maybe as we close out, tell us about some of that experience in the US and your work there.
Well, I just want to say that the Russian playbook is very simple. They haven't invented nothing else. They project on others what they do themselves. They don't need to invent, to explain what others do. They just understand, self-reflect. They see what they do themselves, and they say others do this. So they persecute religion, they purge religion, religious group, they kill religion in their own areas, also the occupied areas, and they say Ukrainians do this. It's very simple. Speaking about the United States, I believe I find a great deal of affinity between the American religious landscape and the Ukraine landscape, exactly because of this diversity, because of this understanding of importance of religious freedom, and again because of this importance to find the balance, this formula between national security, especially in the US in the wake of 9/11, and other threats and other challenges, and religious freedom. So we can learn from each other in this regarding this formula.
Yeah, that's a very powerful place to end today. These challenges are going to be very difficult, but we can count on so many faithful people and voices like you to be an advocate. And if there is a line crossed, you'll be the first ones to advocate and stand up and say, no, religious freedom is being violated.
Exactly.
in this case. And I think we can count on the Ukrainian people to also stand up. When lines are crossed, even maybe this week, when they feel like lines are crossed, they speak up to their government and their government listens.
Exactly.
And that's something that was a very powerful example of Western-style democracy still at work here in Ukraine. There is no country that's perfect, but I would say that we saw that example this week, and maybe I'll let you comment very briefly and end on that note.
Well, yes, for us, democracy is not something which is imposed upon us. It's a many centuries story of democracy in Ukraine, which was Russians tried to subsume, tried to oppress, but never managed it. And I think democracy for us, it's not for the sake of the West. It's not for the sake of the donors of our friends in the West. It's for our own sake, and that is the most important thing. People understand that democracy serves themselves. They themselves understand the importance of democracy and people's voices. That's why we do this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Cyril Hovorun from Kyiv, Ukraine. Thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. A pleasure
Many
to meet you.
blessings.